I never wanted trouble. I just wanted to live peacefully, follow the rules, and take care of my family like everyone else. But then, one Tuesday morning, I stepped outside and saw a notice stuck to my door. That's when I knew things had changed. Just because of 3 cars in my driveway, one for work, one for my wife, and an old Honda I gave to my daughter, they fined me $500 a month. But what they didn't know is that I had quietly bought up most of the neighborhood over the past 5 years. And tonight, the powerful woman named Karen will find out who really owns this community. If you've ever been oppressed by misused power or witnessed injustice happening right before your eyes with no way to stop it, then you won't want to miss this story. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because you're about to witness an unprecedented overthrow, not with violence, but with strategy, patience, and the truth. I never wanted to get into trouble with the HOA. I'm the type of person who likes to live peacefully, follow the rules, and stay quiet. But last Tuesday morning, when I stepped outside and saw the bright orange notice taped to the front door, I knew that had changed. My hand trembled as I opened it and read the cold words. The entire fee has increased immediately, with a $500 fine each month for too many cars on the property. 3 cars, just 3, had made them treat me like a criminal. One was the truck I use for work at the construction site. One was my wife Sarah's SUV, used for her shifts at the hospital. And the last was the old Honda we just gave our daughter for her 16th birthday last month. All of them were neatly parked on our driveway. Yet they still wouldn't let it go. From the kitchen window, I saw Karen Mitchell, our HOA president, walking the street with her little pink paperclip and tape measure. She stopped at my driveway, took out her phone, and started taking pictures, coldly, as if this were a crime scene. The 3rd time that week. "Honey, she's out there again," Sarah called from the living room. "Maybe we should park the Honda in the garage." I shook my head, pouring coffee with a firmness that even surprised me. "Number. We're not going to hide our daughter's car as if we've done something wrong." The garage was already full of Sarah's medical equipment and my work tools, things we had clearly explained at the last HOA meeting. I still remember Karen's look and half-smile that day when I tried to explain my family's situation. "Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson," she said without even looking up from her phone. "Maybe if you can't afford a proper storage space in the garage, this neighborhood isn't for you." That line kept repeating in my head for days afterward, not because of the contempt, but because she didn't know that over the past 5 years, I had quietly been buying up every property in this development. Quietly, discreetly, without drawing attention. Through my real estate investment company, I had been quietly building a long-term strategy. Every time a house went up for sale in the neighborhood, I made sure it was bought under different LLC names, creating the perfect cover for these discrete transactions. At first, it was just a smart investment move, but over time it had become something much bigger. A quiet, steady shift in power, but one that was certain. This morning I stepped outside to get the mail, deliberately slowing my pace. Across the street, Karen Mitchell, better known as Powerful Karen, pretended to be tending to Mrs. Johnson's rose bushes, but her eyes were still glancing at me from the corner of her gaze. Poor Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman who, just last month, was fined by Karen for having roses that were too vibrant, claiming it disrupted the color uniformity of the Harmony neighborhood. Ironically, the name of the neighborhood, Harmony, had never felt more distant. My phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer appeared on the screen. "Property closing complete. You now own 67% of the project." I smiled slightly and tucked my phone into my pocket, just as Karen walked toward me, clutching her clipboard tightly to her chest. "Mr. Thompson," she called out, her voice sweet but forced. "I trust you've received the notice regarding your car violation?" I nodded. "I've received it, Karen. and I have a few questions about the legal basis for this sudden fee increase." I kept my voice calm and professional. She waved her hand dismissively. "The board has full authority to impose fees as needed. Perhaps if you attended more meetings, you'd understand how these things work." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. But what Karen didn't know was that I had attended every meeting over the past 5 years through authorized representatives from the other properties I owned. I'd been sitting there observing, taking notes, and recording every selective display of power from Karen, every questionable fee, every time she abused her role to manipulate the entire neighborhood to her liking. As she turned and walked away, her expensive high heels clicking on the sidewalk, Karen tossed a casual remark over her shoulder. "Oh, and the board is calling an emergency meeting tonight, at 7 p.m. sharp. We'll be discussing additional measures for problematic properties." She had no idea that the problem she referred to was the one who held the key to the entire community. And tonight, everything would change forever. I watched Karen's figure fade and then pulled out my phone, texting my lawyer. "It's time to prepare the documents we've discussed for so long." Tonight, Karen would be gone, not because she was forced out of the neighborhood, but because her power would be gone. As I saw my daughter's car pulling into the driveway, I noticed Karen stopping again to take a few more pictures. My blood was boiling, but I kept my composure. It will all be over tonight. Before I did that, I needed to make a few important calls. I went back inside and spread the real estate map on my desk, the map I had carefully drawn and marked over the past 5 years. Each plot was color-coded, categorized, with little annotations in red ink. This wasn't just an investment plan. It was proof that I had quietly prepared everything to expose Karen's prolonged abuse of power. The reign of terror led by the HOA she controlled was coming to an end. She thought this was just about the cars? No, Karen's biggest mistake wasn't targeting me. It was underestimating me. The phone rang. It was Mrs. Johnson from across the street, choked up as she had received yet another violation notice. As I listened to her despair, my eyes scanned the framed photo on the wall. My father standing in front of his first house, his smile full of pride, before being forced to sell by an oppressive HOA company 2 decades ago. He was the one who taught me not to fight with anger, but with strategy. Don't react. Calculate. Don't rush. Be patient. I looked at the clock. Just 6 hours left until the fateful meeting. When I walked into the community center meeting room, the tension in the air was like a stretched rope, ready to snap. Every seat was filled. Long-time neighbors, people I had lived beside for years, whispered among themselves, all looking tired and angry. Karen had truly crossed the line this time. She had even hired a professional photographer to take photos of my driveway from multiple angles, trying to make 3 ordinary cars look like an illegal parking lot. "Let's get started," Karen announced, her voice high-pitched as if she were stepping onto a Broadway stage. The glittering pink gavel struck the podium, creating a sound that was disproportionate to its weight. And so the emergency meeting on Tuesday night officially began, a time she knew most working-class families wouldn't be able to attend. But I was there, sitting quietly in the back row, watching the familiar performance Karen always put on, a disguised monologue under the guise of community management. "As you can see from these professional photographs," she began, flipping through each PowerPoint slide with an unmistakable sense of self-satisfaction. On the screen were images taken from multiple angles. My parking lot. "Mr. Thompson's property," she declared, "has become a rundown parking lot." A few gasps came from the front row minions, people I knew well who still had Christmas decorations up until March without being fined. I glanced around, catching the eye of Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly neighbor shaking her head in disapproval. She had been fined last month just for letting her grandson's car stay in the driveway while he helped fix a leaking roof. Mr. Chen, the middle school science teacher, was also sitting nearby, frowning as he jotted something down in his notebook. He had received a violation notice for his car slightly crossing the white line during a recent snowstorm, a situation that most people would sympathize with. Karen clicked to the next slide, a close-up photo of my daughter's car, clearly framed to look like an obstruction causing traffic problems. "This car has been parked in the same spot for over 48 hours, she said with outrage. Not a word was mentioned about the fact that my daughter had just returned from college the previous weekend. The information was carefully selected to serve one purpose only: defamation. The meeting dragged on as Karen presented charts, maps, and even Google Earth satellite images, proving that property values had decreased due to the disorder caused by my family. She read complaints from anonymous neighbors, whom I suspected were likely friends from her circle, and even a weather report to emphasize that my car caused unusual snow buildup on the street. Finally, she pulled out a thick stack of documents and declared, "I've recorded every instance of a vehicle entering or exiting Mr. Thompson's property in the past 3 months." I raised an eyebrow. "Recording every movement of my family?" Whispers of confusion began to spread across the room. Some of the neighbors started to look uncomfortable, their eyes darting around as if to see who would speak up first. Then suddenly, Sarah Jenkins, the neighbor who lived right next door, stood up. "Karen," she said, her voice clear and firm, "aren't you going a little too far? These are just ordinary cars, in a perfectly ordinary driveway." Karen's face contorted as she shouted, trying to silence Sarah. "You're not allowed to speak!" Karen's voice rang out arrogantly, but the room began to stir. I sat still, observing as Karen's husband, Bob, began handing out copies of a newly proposed rule, a ridiculous rule that nearly made me laugh. It stated that each household would only be allowed to own 2 cars, and they must be parked in the garage, regardless of the fact that not everyone had the means or space to do so. Karen coldly declared, "Now we'll vote on the new vehicle restrictions and the fee increases, without allowing any discussion. All in favor?" she said, as if everything was already decided. And that was my moment. I stood up slowly, rolled back my shoulders, and adjusted my tie. "Point of order, if I may," I said. Karen squinted at me over her reading glasses, clearly recognizing who was rising. "You are not recognized, Mr. Thompson," she snapped. But I was ready. I pulled out a folder and flipped to the exact page. According to HOA bylaws, Section 73, any property owner may raise a point of order related to voting procedures. The room fell silent. Not a sound. Not a breath out of place. I walked forward, each step echoing sharply across the floor. "Before we vote," I said, "I believe everyone here deserves to understand the current ownership structure of this HOA." I paused, then slowly unfolded a large real estate map, each lot meticulously marked. Karen's face started to pale. "Over the past 5 years," I continued, "Sunrise Properties has quietly acquired the majority of properties within this development." A few gasps rang out. I looked up, meeting the eyes of every board member, every neighbor, people who thought they knew who held the power here. "And as CEO of Sunrise Properties," I said slowly, "I think you might be interested in knowing who actually controls the majority of the HOA you're voting on tonight." The energy in the room shifted instantly. Eyes turned from Karen to me. I let the silence hang for a beat, then added, "But perhaps, before we get into that, we should first discuss the surveillance activities Mrs. Karen has been conducting on families here, without consent or authorization." The whispers erupted, urgent, forceful, unstoppable. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw phones being raised, recording the moment, this moment when long-standing power began to crack. Karen's hands trembled as she reached for her water bottle, accidentally knocking her beloved gavel to the floor, where it landed with a harsh clatter. Bob rushed to the podium, whispering something in her ear, and for a split second her eyes widened. That was when Karen finally understood. The man she had bullied, threatened, and manipulated all these years was not the easy target she believed him to be. The meeting room fell quiet again as I placed my leather briefcase on the table in front of me. My heart pounded, but my voice remained calm, and in the flicker of Karen's anxious eyes, I watched the smug smile she'd worn for so long begin to fade. Before the vote on the new fees could begin, I stood up, my voice calm but clear, and said I had something important to share with everyone. As I opened my leather briefcase, I carefully pulled out thick stacks of paper, each one a certified property ownership document, and each one a piece of the plan I had been quietly building for years. I laid them out on the table, arranging them neatly in rows, as the room slowly filled with murmurs of surprise. Eyes began darting around, heads tilted down to read the lines of text, trying to grasp what was really happening. For the past 5 years, I continued, I've been observing this HOA board, particularly how they handle community matters. I looked up, directly at Karen. I've seen them ignore serious maintenance issues while relentlessly hassling families over the most absurdly minor infractions. I paused, letting the silence settle before adding, I watched Mrs. Karen issue a warning to Mrs. Johnson, 82 years old, just because her flower pot exceeded the height limit by exactly 1 inch. Meanwhile, her best friend Susan's blindingly purple fence hasn't received so much as a mention. Karen's face flushed red with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. That's not true. I enforce all rules equally, she protested, her hand trembling as she clutched her water bottle. But when she spilled the water across her expensive designer blouse, the tension within her became visibly apparent. I calmly pulled up a presentation on the meeting room's large screen. This, I said, is footage from my security camera. 3 a.m. last Tuesday. The screen lit up with a crystal-clear image of Karen bent over, using a measuring tape to inspect the height of my lawn. The room erupted with gasps, sighs, quiet, sarcastic chuckles, and knowing glances followed from those who had endured similar petty intrusions. I didn't stop there. I pointed to another set of images, clear violations from other households that had been completely ignored, right after they signed contracts with the landscaping company owned by Karen's son. Nods began to ripple through the room. People were remembering, recalling every unfair situation they had endured, and now everything was starting to piece together like a puzzle, revealing the truth. But the most interesting part, I said, picking up the stack of ownership documents, is something I discovered recently. I looked up, holding everyone's gaze in a moment of silence before dropping the final bombshell. Through my company, Sunrise Properties, I now own 67% of the homes in this entire development. I paused, letting that truth settle into the room's tense atmosphere. And then it happened. That strange, still moment when everyone slowly realized that I, not Karen, was the one truly in control of this neighborhood. I was the majority owner of the very HOA she had used to manipulate everyone for years. Karen shot up, knocking over her chair, her face pale with panic. "You can't do that, that's not allowed." Her voice rose in a shrill tone, but I just smiled, keeping calm. "Actually, I can," I replied. "I've had 3 different law firms review everything, and it's all perfectly legal." I pulled out another file folder and gently opened it for all to see. I've also submitted a complaint signed by 32 residents, citing harassment, selective enforcement, and suspicious fees. The room erupted in whispers and waves of astonishment. Mrs. Johnson stood up, her voice trembling with emotion. "Last winter they fined me $200 for not clearing my walkway fast enough while I was in the hospital with pneumonia." Others began to rise, sharing their own stories of unfair treatment. Karen tried to regain control, banging her gavel on the podium, but no one was listening anymore. I stepped forward and announced the dissolution of the current board. We will hold new elections, with term limits and clear rules on conflicts of interest, I said. No more 3 a.m. lawn measurements. No more selective enforcement. Bob Chen, from 2 houses down, raised his hand in agreement with my actions. Before long, more hands went up around the room. Karen, unable to take it any longer, grabbed her designer purse and started heading toward the door. "This meeting is adjourned," she shouted. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." I remained calm and responded, "According to the HOA bylaws, Section 7, you need a majority vote to adjourn, and I don't believe you have those numbers anymore." I gestured toward the documents spread across the table. "We're just getting started." Karen froze, her hand on the doorknob, realizing her grip on power was slipping away. 20 years of ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist were about to end. I opened another folder, my eyes never leaving hers. "Let's talk about the mysterious pool renovation fees from last summer," I continued. "Fees totaling $50,000, yet the pool has never been repaired." I flipped to a bank statement, smiling at the growing anticipation in the room. "I have some very interesting financial records to share." Karen slumped against the wall, her face pale, still unaware that a local news van had just pulled into the parking lot. I had invited them to cover our community's reorganization meeting, and I knew the next few hours would change our neighborhood forever. But before it all began, we still had years of Karen's secrets to uncover, and I had the receipts. My careful planning was finally paying off. The best part, of course, was still to come. On Monday, I walked into my lawyer's office feeling indescribably triumphant. I had already seen 20 angry voicemails from Karen. She had discovered my company's property filings over the weekend and threatened to sue me for secretly trying to take over the neighborhood. I couldn't help but smile. At last, she was showing her true colors. But what stood out wasn't just Karen's fury. It was her fear. That evening, she began spreading rumors that I planned to turn our peaceful suburb into a parking lot for my car collection. Some neighbors actually believed her, especially after she showed them forged documents suggesting I had ties to a shady development company. I knew I had to act quickly. My security cameras had caught Karen sneaking onto my property at midnight, taking close-up photos of my license plate. The very next day, she filed a lawsuit, accusing me of violating HOA regulations by purchasing properties through my company. She even attempted to obtain an emergency court order to freeze my voting rights within the HOA. But that was when all my months of meticulous planning paid off. My attorney revealed our secret weapon. We had detailed records of every HOA meeting from the past 5 years, along with video footage showing Karen handing out violation passes to her friends while harshly penalizing others. We had copies of checks proving she used HOA funds to renovate her own backyard. Best of all, we had emails in which she boasted about using her power to keep undesirable elements out of the neighborhood. The judge's eyes grew wider with every piece of evidence we presented, and Karen's face turned red as we played time-stamped footage of her measuring my lawn at 3 a.m., photographing my teenage daughter's car, and posting threatening notes on neighbors' doors. Karen's attorney began to visibly sweat as we introduced evidence showing she altered HOA records to hide a friend's unpaid fees. But the real shock came when 3 former board members stepped forward and testified that Karen had bullied them into approving unfair rules. They admitted that she specifically targeted certain homeowners she didn't like, and even bragged about using HOA fines to fund her annual trips to Hawaii. The courtroom fell completely silent when we showed Karen her own social media posts, where she mocked elderly residents who couldn't afford their HOA dues. She had posted pictures of herself at a resort pool with the caption, "Big thanks to all the rule-breaking neighbors for sponsoring this vacation. Keep those violations coming." Karen tried to defend herself by claiming she was just doing her job. But then we played an audio recording from last month's HOA meeting. In it, she could be heard screaming at Mrs. Johnson, our 75-year-old neighbor, simply because her bird feeder was 2 inches too low. That was when Karen completely lost control. She jumped up from her seat, pointed a finger at me, and shouted, "He's trying to destroy our perfect neighborhood. Do you know what kind of people will move in if we don't have strict rules? He might want to turn this place into one of those communities where people can park wherever they want." But the judge had heard enough. Not only did he dismiss Karen's lawsuit, he also ordered a full audit of the HOA's finances. As we left the courthouse, my phone began buzzing with a flood of messages from neighbors. Every one of them had received an email from Karen, announcing her immediate resignation from the board, citing pressure from big money interest groups as her reason for stepping down. I saw Karen rush to her car, furiously typing on her phone. I knew this wasn't over. Karen still had loyal followers in the neighborhood, and she wasn't the type to back down easily. But now, I had what I needed. Evidence that our HOA president had been abusing her power for years, and the legal authority to finally make real changes. On the morning of the final hearing, we started with a surprise. Karen had sent a fleet of news vans to my house. She thought public pressure would make me back down, but instead, she handed me the perfect stage. I straightened my tie, grabbed my documents, and walked directly to the reporters with a confident smile. "Good morning, everyone. I'm James Thompson, and I'd love to show you something interesting about our HOA's financial records," I said. I pulled out the color-coded spreadsheets my accountant had prepared, showing years of suspicious fees that always seemed to end up funding projects benefiting Karen's closest friends. The reporter's eyes lit up as I explained how Karen had charged higher violation fines to single parents than to her golf buddies. One reporter gasped when I played security footage of Karen measuring my lawn at 3 a.m., even while her own yard violated every rule she enforced. Inside the courtroom, Karen sat beside her attorney, wearing her signature faux pearl necklace and flashing a smug smile. But that smile quickly vanished as our lawyer began presenting the evidence. We showed photos of Karen's own house, clearly violating several HOA rules: her bright purple mailbox, an overgrown garden, and 4 cars parked on the street. The judge leaned forward as we revealed Karen's secret Facebook group, where she bragged about targeting certain families. "Let's see how long the Thompsons last with the new fees I just wrote in. Maybe they'll finally move out and sell to someone more appropriate," Karen had written. Karen leapt up to object, but instantly froze when we played an audio recording from last week's pool party. Her voice echoed through the courtroom. "Of course I make up violations. How else are we supposed to control who lives here?" The judge didn't hesitate. He ordered Karen to be removed from the HOA board and to repay every unfair fee she had collected. The look on her face when she heard the total, $1,478.92, was better than any revenge I could have planned. After the trial, I used my majority ownership to create a new kind of HOA board. We elected 5 residents from different parts of the neighborhood, including Mrs. Rodriguez, whom Karen had tried to blacklist because of her grandson's car, and Mr. Chen, whose beautiful garden Karen had deemed too unusual. Change happened fast. Kids were now allowed to play basketball in their driveways, gardens could grow vegetables instead of just flowers, and families could park more than 2 cars as long as they fit in their own space. 3 weeks later, I looked out the window as Karen's moving truck pulled up. She had sent out one final letter to everyone, claiming she was moving to a better neighborhood with higher standards. That evening, my daughter parked her car in our driveway, right next to my work truck and my wife's SUV. I put up a small sign: "Welcome to Thompson Hills, where good neighbors make great neighborhoods." The next morning, I got a surprise call from a television producer. They had seen the news report and wanted to make a documentary about how we transformed our HOA. As I looked outside, watching the kids playing freely in the yard and neighbors chatting over garden fences, I smiled. I thought about Karen watching it from her new home with the strict one-car garage rule. The best part? Our property values had gone up by 15% in the first month after Karen left. Turns out, people actually prefer living in a neighborhood where they're treated with respect rather than ruled by fear. A few of Karen's old friends even stopped by to apologize, admitting they had only followed her out of fear of being her next target. We still have an HOA, but now it protects the neighborhood instead of controlling it. Every month, we use the fees for things that actually matter: upgrading the playground, repairing the pool, and helping elderly residents maintain their homes. We even started a community garden in the same spot where Karen once snapped photos of lawn violations. As I organized the last of the court documents, my phone buzzed with a text message from the neighborhood patrol group at Karen's new community. They were asking for advice on how to deal with their own power-hungry HOA president. I leaned back in my chair and thought, sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's showing others how to stand up for themselves. I don't need to yell. I don't need to slam the table or point my finger. All I need is 67% ownership and a thick file of evidence detailing every abuse of power Karen has committed over the years. And when her moving truck left the neighborhood, I knew. We didn't just reclaim justice for ourselves, but for an entire community that had lived in fear. If my story has inspired you, or simply made you smile because justice still exists, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs to know that. Sometimes the best response isn't revenge, but victory.